And welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reed Robison, and I are joined by Demetri Vallejos. Demetri has dedicated his life to helping people find optimal wellness and productivity by remembering a long-forgotten truth, that we are all gods. He has experience and skill with plant medicine, meditation, psychedelic integration, astrology, and something he calls quantum bionetic coaching. So I gotta warn you folks, Demetri's esoteric knowledge runs deep. There might be moments in today's episode where you think, what the hell is this guy talking about? I tried to act as a stand-in for those of you who might have that reaction and asked some probing questions, but I invite you to please have an open mind today for this episode and listen all the way through. You won't regret it. Or you might. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you how to feel. Thanks to all of you who have left us reviews and rated the show on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Please share this episode with a friend that you think needs to hear it, or an enemy, or somebody you're ambivalent about. I don't care. I'll trust your judgment. If you want to learn more about Demetri's work, you can go to rawdimension.com. That's RAWDIMENSION.com. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Demetri Vallejos. We are back here on Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers. Hello, Reed.
Hello. You've got your radio voices blossoming.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to sound entertaining, energetic, because my whole life I've been given the feedback that I sound really bored when I answer the phone.
It's two bored podcasters.
Tired and bored. So this is me at Amped Up Energy. We are joined today by our guest, Demetri Vallejos.
Hello.
Appreciate you joining us today. I was going to say introduce yourself, which I would like you to do, but I'm wondering if maybe you could introduce yourself by telling us your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Where to begin, right? The podcast is Psychedelic Frontiers, right?
Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers.
Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers.
Which means anything we want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot that I've experienced in my experience with psychedelics and, just plant medicine in general. But my story is, I think, it comes together on many different levels of what I would consider to be consciousness. There's my human experience that I have as being Demetri. And then there is, I think, the experience that I have is just being consciousness, right? And recognizing the self in the mirror that is the other, you Reed, you, Steve, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as this experience orchestrates itself, I think a lot of my story is based in just a regular, normal, childhood also, but it then opens up to my, my experiences with psychedelics at an early age that I think catalyzed a lot of my personal seeking and personal efforts into understanding myself, understanding the world, understanding my conscious experience, my emotions, and then, what I would even go as far as saying is the way that I work personally, right? The script or the role that is Demetri, right? The character that is Demetri. I think even Jim Carrey would probably have something to say about that, and his experience of playing all the different characters that he's played and understanding that, he's just given this role as being Jim Carrey, and that's who people know him as, right? And the experience that I've had throughout my life and throughout, adolescence, my teenage years, growing into my 20s. I'm now, on the beginning end of my 30s. I'll be 31 this year. This body will be 31. Mm-hmm. My story, my experience in life, it's very serendipitous. I feel like it's always been guided. It's something that, when one slows down enough, I think we're able to really listen to who we are. There's a pulse that happens within us, and I've always been aware of that pulse. I've always been aware of that guidance or that inner intuition that, you know, that has always been there for me. And oftentimes as a kid or like a teenager, I found myself working with plant medicines and psychedelics, you know, specifically mushrooms and LSD. And, but it was never with this like recreational off-putting hinge. Like it was this like, I recognized the experience and pursued it more or frequently in order to understand myself around those aspects of my being as I grew up. I mean, the first time that I experienced, you know, I think psilocybin mushrooms, I think I was 15 or 16. And it was one of those things that was very eye-opening, you know, to have the inner visions that occurred. And I mean, we sat and laid on a pool table and listened to Lateralus, the Tool album, for, you know, upwards of 4 hours. And the inner visions that came out of that were, you know, if you've ever seen like the album cover of Tool Lateralus, you know, it has like the Alex Gray paintings and stuff all throughout it. And it's like kind of an interactive like booklet and stuff, really, really fascinating. But like you see this, like the four-faced figure that Alex Gray has drawn, you know, or painted, and it's like the multicolored, faceted, the multi-faced, you know, daemon or whatever you want to call it. And that was what I had initially seen in my inner world. And then, you know, things would begin to transition. And, you know, as I explored my own psychedelic or entheogenic use, I became more fascinated with health and wellness, like in my 20s, as I emerged from, I think, the existential crisis of my teens, and, you know, kind of began to like really ground myself in this human experience and recognize that there's actually a lot that's here, and that I have lots of emotions, they need to be processed. Like, you know, I mean, I would say normal childhood, you know, like I think just about anywhere aside from Utah. I mean, maybe here in Utah it happens often, but you know, when parents get divorced, sometimes like kids get in the middle of it, they feel responsible, right? There's all kinds of stuff that comes up in that space. And so, you know, when my mom and my stepdad decided to, you know, go their separate ways, like there was a lot of, you know, fighting and arguing and things that would go on, and I would get in the middle of it sometimes, and that just kind of like perpetuated negative catalyst within my relationships with my mom and my dad and or stepdad at the time. And yeah, you know, so it became apparent that I had a lot of baggage, you know, that I was holding on to, and had found, you know, my own comfort or like balance, stability in using psychedelics, specifically LSD at the time, and a couple of occasions with MDMA, where there were very, you know, catalytic events that happened during those journeys that assisted me with healing. But they were more than just like, it was more than just the healing aspect of it. It was like a recognition of like the deeper level of consciousness that we all experience and that we all share, this like infinite unity or this connectedness, this oneness, right?
Let me interrupt, because I think that's something I really want to explore with you. As I'm hearing you talk about your story, and thank you for being willing to open up so much. I really appreciate it. I'm detecting that you have learned some things about consciousness, about your consciousness, about consciousness in general, the concept or the experience of consciousness, that I'd like to learn about.
Sure.
Could you riff on consciousness for a bit?
Yeah, you know, like it just is, we just are, right? Like there is what I would call the great pralaya. This is known as the universal breath in many of the occult teachings. Consciousness is something that is the byproduct, I would say, of the self, in understanding that there is, you know, there are elements to our world, to our universe, you know, fire, earth, air, water. Some would even go as far as saying there's a fifth element, a quintessential element, ether or aether, right? consciousness is what I would call nous, N-O-U-S, right? Nous is this intelligence that exists in all things. It exists in the water, it exists in the air, it exists in the rocks, the stones, the earth. It exists in the fire, right? And it is what propels us. So consciousness is, to me, it's an awareness, right? It's like, it's the moment. Like, it's happening in this moment, like synonymously, serendipitously with the question that you asked me. I would, ask your listeners and you to consider for a moment, like, where does your skin end and the air begin? Where does the air end and my skin begin? Right? So what I'm, spawning or inviting your consciousness and your awareness into is to try to palpate the fabric of space-time, right? Understanding that there's no separation between you and I, right? But the conscious experience is personified. It's self-intuited. It's self-organized. But there is a nature about it that creates this interconnectedness in which we share the moment and the catalyst that occurs so long as one is paying attention and has the intention to give and receive, right? So in this conscious experience, we are sharing, we are exchanging energy. I would go as far as, we are utilizing telepathy, but it is in the form of me exhaling air and that air being vibrated along my vocal cords that is transmitting a vibration to you that you are able to pick up and receive, right?
Everything is energy.
Everything is energy. It is all vibration.
Where does the word nous come from? Do you know? It strikes me because in French it means we.
That's fascinating that it means we in French. Nous, I want to say, is an original Latin word. It is found originally in the Corpus Hermeticum, as far as dating back as far as I can find. The Corpus Hermeticum being a body of text that is related to the Hermetic lineage.
Could you explain that a little bit? I find it fascinating, the whole Hermetic lineage. And principles, concepts, but maybe just an overview for people listening.
There are 7 principles within the Hermetic lineage. To list them off the top of my head,
Putting you on the spot.
Putting you on the spot. There's the principle of vibration. There is the principle of rhythm. There is the principle of correspondence. The principle of gender,
like polarities.
And not to go into each of them, but as it's just kind of like a brief overview, these principles are founded, I would say, in some of the most ancient practices or lineages that one can find in history. Some would say that the Corpus Hermeticum predates a lot of Moses's writings and things, right? And so even dates back into ancient Egyptian theology and things, and the connection that is drawn between Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth the Atlantean, and understanding the story that is held with Thoth the Atlantean being the original scribe of language, and talking about like the wisdom, like Thoth the Atlantean, or would be considered like the wisdom keeper of our universe, right? And throughout history, there have been several, I guess, lines drawn between Mercury, like the Greek god Mercury, Hermes Trismegistus, and then like Thoth the Atlantean. And when one translates, Hermes Trismegistus, it is Hermes the thrice great, or Hermes the thrice born, Hermes the thrice intelligent, depending upon the translation. But the Hermetic lineage is one of these practices that connects very deeply into what I would consider to be reality creation, like creating our reality as we speak. Like when you really like look at the principles that are held within this teaching, it teaches that like they're initiates to work with the elements, to work with nature, to
like
work
alchemy.
like alchemy. I mean, alchemy originally was something that was paired very heavily with astrology, right? And like this word nous, kind of drawing it back around, is like connected into this great intelligence that exists throughout nature, that exists within us as humans. It exists within the air that we're breathing. Like it is the creator, right? It is the intelligence that organizes the way that our DNA decides to promulgate the proteins in our bodies to develop our bodies, right?
The great mystery.
Yeah, like, I mean, it would be considered like the great mystery. But yeah, I mean, nous is this all-encompassing, intelligent energy that is within everything. So
cool.
This non-dual, we are everything, everything is us experience is a common one for people a common experience people have under the influence of psychedelics. And it's not just psychedelics, but it is, people can have this experience while meditating or during sex or during extreme physical exertion or an ice bath, right? There's a lot of different spinning around, right? There's a lot of different ways, breath work. But it's interesting that it's so common when we use psychedelics. And it makes me wonder why. Certainly there are neurological reasons why. We can get down to the nitty-gritty physical science. What happens in the brain that produces such an experience? Parts of the brain communicating that don't normally communicate. Less activity in certain parts of the brain that are often very active and dominant. Neurotransmitters. Yeah.
Why does it occur, or what's its purpose? Like,
Both.
why is it a component of the mystical experience that we look for and assess for and like want people to have, like connecting to something greater than themselves, getting out of that individual ego space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of draws back to that question that I asked you earlier, like where does your skin end and the air begin and mind begin, right? Like there's this conscious experience that we have and that we seek individually for the self. And, one can go very far into that, I mean, we see figures like Elon Musk, right? Like, or the Dalai Lama, right? Like these people are having their own personalized experience, but they have such a powerful catalytic experience on the rest of the world that, what I would say is that they are reflections in ways, but like drawing into this, like we are one, we share the same experience thread. I think it's important for one to recognize that like physically there's nothing that separates us, right? The only thing that separates us, what I would consider to be conscious aspects of the being, like fears, egos, beliefs, desires, these types of things, like the way that we love, why we love, maybe different like physical manifestations within the body, illnesses, ailments, different neuronal passageways or pathways. But overall, we're made up of the same stuff, right? So I think that when it comes down to, this experience of seeing the self in the self, and like in the mirror that is you, right? And I get to experience you through like an empathic sense. I'm able to learn more about myself, right? Through that experience. But it's one of those personalized ideologies that I think is important for an individual to choose into themselves, because the experience of dissolution of that ego consciousness or that individual perspective is a very powerful experience. I mean, it's for me personally, in all the years that I've experienced entheogens or psychedelics, I think I maybe had complete and total ego dissolution like around 5 or 6 times. And it's not something that I can consciously seek after, like give me the goods,
Right.
like it doesn't happen that way. I think it's something that is given, like that experience is given or provided by the self when the self is ready to dissolve themselves into that we paradigm, right? And I mean, this is where I would say that we just experienced the end of Pisces, and we're entering into the age of Aquarius, and the differentiations that are held between those two spaces energetically are vastly different. I mean, Pisces is considered the end of the astrological wheel, right? Aquarius is considered the beginning in ways. And also is very much bound in that we concept. It's all about everybody in the age of Aquarius, like making sure that everybody is cared for, everybody is recognized. And, like this theory of consciousness, I mean, goes back so many thousands of years that, you can look at like the Vedic traditions and the stories that they've held around like the different yugas and things, and understanding that as we complete these cycles in our cosmos, we come back deeper into awareness of self, deeper of awareness of the other, and our consciousness begins to brighten and enlighten, and just naturally, it's a natural process of understanding the way that energy or consciousness is distributed throughout the universe, like. I mean, astrobiology, right? Like, or like cosmobiology is like what I would call it, is like understanding that, like the planets themselves are individual facets of us, of our being. I mean, this was this was part of the original story that was told in Grecan like time frames, and understanding like the pantheon and stuff. Mars being, the war, or the god of war, and these types of things. Venus being the god of love and attraction, all these things. But the sun, our logos, is this being that provides all of our consciousness. It projects this consciousness into the recognition of self that experiences itself as human. And it's this individual, personalized, very unique consciousness, and kind of getting back into, I think, the understanding of self, and understanding how these frameworks are laid out is like, there's the sun that we experience, and then there's the great and central sun that our solar system revolves around, and as we get closer to that great and central sun, would be considered like the Kali Yuga. Right, like in this Vedic tradition. And as we approach the Kali Yuga and complete the Kali Yuga, is it that we are, said to find more enlightenment or more awareness of self. And that's, I think, an important kind of point to kind of just frame for people, is understanding that there are cycles that go on that are much larger than, the simple hand around the clock that we experience.
Because some would say that the psychedelic renaissance is a result of these greater forces at play, right? Like the Kali Yuga type cycles. Because we often wonder or talk about, where did it come from? Why is it showing up in this way now?
Yeah.
But it is fascinating to think about the forces that these, the planetary forces at play, the moon, and what it does to the rhythms of our planet. Just as an example, like the tides,
oceans, the tides,
the cycles of all kinds, admissions to psychiatric units, babies being born.
Simple neuroses in an individual. I mean, typically coincides with the full moon.
Yeah,
the word loony, right, is a reference to the moon.
And astrology is the original psychology. It's just fascinating, and that whole concept of as above, so below,
which is a hermetic principle as well. This understanding of correspondence, and understanding that that everything has its polarity, and has an equal and opposite reaction. There is the law of cause and effect, and these types of things that go on within our universe. And as science has progressed, kind of touching on this concept of Hermeticism again, is like, as science has progressed, we start to see in like tremendous similarities that have been held as tradition within this lineage for thousands and thousands of years, that represent like very similar pathways is natural physics, like current modern day physics, or dipping into the quantum physics, right? Like understanding the ability that we each have to influence our world based upon our perception or perceptions, right? And I think that this is probably one of the most important teachings that is held within our lineage, is that we create our own reality. Like,
so this is something I want to play around with, because the idea, you mentioned science, and I'm a social scientist, right? I'm a clinical psychologist and was trained in all of the very literal ways of the scientific method, and took the physics classes, took the chemistry classes. And I think I have a healthy appreciation for what we can explore with the scientific method and what is still inaccessible to us via the scientific method. But I've often thought about this concept of what is real, right? And how is it knowable? So ontology and epistemology. How do we develop knowledge of a thing? How do we detect a thing? And, the modern Western scientific method has granted us a lot of cool things, especially technology.
Oh, totally.
But it is very much a evidence-based, and evidence being empirical evidence, something that I can detect with my senses, something I can measure with numbers, something I can detect with instruments that are detecting something on the atomic level, right? These are the things I can take literally and say is real. That is until I had a psychedelic experience. And then my confidence in what is real and my access to what is real gets shaken, right? Before psychedelics, I'm an atomized being. I am me, Reed is Reed, Demetri is Demetri, and we are separate. It's obvious where my skin stops and there and begins. It's right there, dude.
The illusion of separation was so obvious.
Yeah, it was so obvious. And now, even in real time, the gears of my normally very efficient brain are grinding to a halt. It's like, wait a second, what is he talking about? Like we aren't separate. We are all one. And you're saying now you're talking about quantum physics. Like, I don't freaking understand quantum physics.
I like to put on the science hat and try and keep the mystical one on at the same time. It's not easy to do.
That would be a funny hat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wizard hat.
Yes, I love that.
Remember when we were talking about earlier today with our colleague friend Paul? He said something that made me double take. He's like, if you're in a completely non-dual state, you can't sense or see your own karma, or just I just think it's relevant in this idea of where does my skin end and yours begin, because in between us, I'm made up of these atoms, right? Electrons whirling around a nucleus, so they're out here too. I breathe, I speak, it pushes on you. There's not really a separation. Like, there's matter. Everything's energy, everything's matter. It's vibrating, spinning, string theory, however you want to look at it.
Like the air that was in you a moment ago is inside of me now that I'm breathing it, right? So the oxygen is giving you life also.
So is it if we go all the way down to the atomic and subatomic level? Again, this is a psychologist talking about physics. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but we have we have molecules impacting one another. So we have, there's the particle
entropy,
and then there's the wave function. And so this is stuff that very few human beings on the planet understand very well. When I understand, you can understand it from like the quantum physicists' level of understanding, where they're trying to measure stuff, and then there's lots of theory based on what we detect. Yeah. And then there's people like Joe Dispenza, who will say that they have this deep understanding of how human beings are quantum entities. And we can, the way quantum entanglement is described from a theoretical or a laboratory observed state, where you have one vibrating molecule on one end of the universe affects the vibration of a molecule on the other end of the universe. Apparently that's a thing. But then somebody like Dispenza might say, well, you can manifest what you want in your life simply by focusing your energy, your cognitive energy. So if I want a Lamborghini, can I manifest it via the techniques taught to me by the secret, just by like hoping for it a lot? This is so my skeptical mind, and I'm sure there are plenty of our listeners who can relate to this. It's like, give me a break, dude.
Totally.
Because you can't turn the table into a Ferrari, you're frustrated.
I actually don't even want a Ferrari. Maybe
I wouldn't want a Ferrari
Maybe
either.
a Tesla.
I could take like a Model X. That'd be nice.
I have pre-ordered a Cybertruck, but I won't be able to afford it. I'm trying to manifest it.
Just like camper shell and everything. Go Back to the Future.
Yeah.
That was energy in the wrong direction, Steve. I won't be able to
That's
afford
my
it.
problem.
This
That's
is
my
good.
problem.
This is good. So yeah, I mean, like understanding this concept is something that is, I mean, it predates Dispenza. Like it's way before him.
He's just the YouTube video I saw most recently.
Oh, sure. I mean, he's just the current lightning rod that is getting everybody's attention.
Because he's a good marketer.
Yeah. And his retreats are incredibly expensive, but value-based and all these things, right? Yeah, it's one of those things that I would say even goes back into ancient Egypt, right? Like the use of the pyramids and understanding what we are, right? Like all we are is vibration, all we are is sound. You know, the understanding the wave dual or wave particle duality is, I would say, based upon perception, right? Like whatever you think is in your own reality, within your own paradigm, again, ontology, right? Like how you're framing your own world. And that is the power of the creator. That is the power of the individual. And also what I would go as far as saying is something that has been worked very hard to be hidden from us, as far as being you know, creators of our own reality. Because if the world's governments or the people in power today really figured that everybody deserved that level of empowerment, they would assist in that process, I imagine. It would be that natural process of compassion and empathy and giving back, reciprocity to the other. In today's world, we see that very fractured. But the concept of this wave, you know, particle duality and understanding how we localize our, you know, our consciousness into the moment is what affects, I think, that greater outcome. We are, I think, gods with amnesia.
I like that.
We are a species with amnesia, and this is to kind of build off of what Graham Hancock has said in the past, of understanding that. Like, I mean, even in the Hermetic teachings, right? Like, it talks about, in the Corpus Hermeticum, it talks about how mankind is are the brothers and sisters of gods and goddesses in the flesh, and that the gods envy man and mankind because we are mortal, because we have that finite sense of reality, but we still have the same power as them, but we don't know it. And this builds upon this concept of how we, like, our thoughts hold power. I mean, our thoughts hold electromagnetic frequency, and they can be measured, they can be detected. Emotions can be detected and can be measured. And typically those emotions scale along, you know, a certain wavelength that is, you know, from lower or, you know, lower frequency or oscillations to higher frequency and oscillations, right? And so kind of getting into this electromagnetism conversation of the self, right? Like, what is this table made out of? It's 99.99999%, you know, like atoms that are held in that space by what we think and theorize as being the Higgs boson particle, right? That kind of like formalizes it into physicality. But we know it as being a table, and so our mind and our conjoined conscious experience together creates this shared experience and formulates that as the experience. As the self continues to liberate the self, this would be considered like moksha in the Vedic traditions. And, you know, the pursuit of eternal liberation out of Maya, which is like the illusion that the Brahman or the Brahma experiences in the
veil.
The veil, right, of consciousness, of remembering or forgetting that we experience, is there as part of this spiritual journey that I think is part of the mystical experience that is elicited from psychedelics or entheogens, depending upon, you know, your openness, your level of openness. And it's something that as an individual, I think is critical as a spirit, right? As an individualized soul of the consciousness that is the all, to have that free will, to have that peace that is always made intact and made whole, so that they can choose into this reality based upon their own selves, if they're ready or not.
What does choose into the reality mean?
I mean, like,
To chop wood, carry water after your awakening, perhaps be able to, inhabit this body and be formless at the same time, like in the world, not of the world. Perhaps. I think your question is really profound earlier of like, why is an experience of oneness or unity a common theme in psychedelics, or why have people through the ages use these practices of altered states or connecting with the divine. And I think,
why does it feel so good, right? Why does it feel so bad when we're separated and so good when we're one?
Because that illusion of separation, Maya, if you will, in the Vedic terminology, is the root of most of the suffering that's out there. Like the reason we suffer is because we think we're individual eyes when we're really part of this sea of divinity, or we forget. Or as Alan Watts says it, like we're all just God playing hide and seek
I
with
love that quote.
him or herself.
Yeah. I mean, what does choosing into the reality look like? It looks like remembering who you are on a daily basis, right? Like,
so I'm remembering I am a God with amnesia. What do I do with that, right? Like,
sure.
Because I mean, when I think of a God, I think I was raised in the LDS Church, so I have that sort of that Judeo-Christian programming of what God might be.
What would Jesus do with that?
Yeah, like, well, Jesus apparently could turn water to wine, so he could do things that I can't do. So
Make
far.
a Ferrari if you wanted.
He could turn this table into a Cybertruck. He also came back to life, according to the scriptures. Walked on water. Right? So he did things that our superheroes do in our movies nowadays, right? Those are sort of the modern gods that my kids look at and be like, oh, it would be cool to fly, right?
So we've been told about Christ.
Right.
But
we were also told that Christ was a white man in that story, when he's really like a
super handsome Scandinavian looking white guy.
Yeah, he's definitely not.
Definitely
Neither was
not.
Mary Magdalene.
But what would someone with the heart of Jesus or Buddha in their heart do? Like if you remembered the divine in you,
The golden rule.
Yeah, how would you show up in the world? Like it's like in these contemplative practices, like you go to yoga, it's like namaste. The divine in me sees and honors the divine in you. We show up that way. That's a different way to relate to each other, beyond the veil of separation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of it's based in the language and the lexicon that we use as individuals, right? Like how we personify and individualize, identify with our experience as humans. It's something that was taken out of our schooling a long time ago, in order to make us more subservient, and subservient to
sovereign beings very easily.
No, you can't, and especially when they're connected into a truth that is so profound that it doesn't require how to say this, like empirical evidence. Right.
The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 suddenly makes more sense.
Of course it does. But breath work can elicit the very same release in your brain as DMT.
Right.
Right. And I would be even venture further to say that DMT is just about in everything, anything that is green or that is alive to that extent. And our bodies have specific receptor sites that are designed for it, let alone does it cross over the blood-brain barrier. There's not many things that do that. Right. And the way that I think that this, molecule being DMT affects our consciousness and what that connects us into is this, like, I mean, it's this, I think it's the, like, it's Ouroboros, right? It's like the snake eating itself. It's that end point where it's like coming full circle, and the individual has the moment to say, like, wait, hold on a minute. Like, I'm everything. Like, you mean like I shouldn't have been rude to my brother like all those years ago because of the golden rule, because of what Christ would have done or whatever, like understanding that, like, when we are gods in this world, and when we do remember our true power, that power can heal or it can hurt, based upon our words, our actions, and everything that's in between. But I think some of these teachings that have been held in, secret schools or secret societies, or the occult teachings where they were, told that these teachings are of the devil or a satanic or evil or whatever.
Like psychedelics.
Like psychedelics is all based in that fear-based paradigm. And so when an individual extracts themselves out of that fear-based paradigm and begins to truly live in the confines of love, or the what I would call the heart of God, or goddess, is there is a certain sense of divine providence, is what I would call it. Of knowing that you're living in alignment with the growth of, like, the natural growth, the natural emergence of your consciousness, the natural emergence of your being, right? And this is the process of healing and the removal of doubt in the self, right? When you encounter this moment of, like, wow, like, such profundity and awareness of beauty and love and grace and sacred authority, and then you begin to remember that every single day. That is the process of choosing into this world, or choosing into this reality, right? It's grounding your consciousness in a new paradigm and extracting your consciousness out of that fear-based paradigm, that programming that you were given at an early age that, I mean, like, let's face it, they did the best with what they had.
Right.
You know, our parents, that's all we can ever do. And when we realize that, there's a tremendous amount of healing that comes from that.
So let me play with this for a second.
Yeah.
So if somebody cuts me off and they are God, and I am God, and they are me and I am them, it doesn't make a lot of sense to flip them off.
Well, I mean, like, traditional Chinese medicine, the middle finger is your pericardium, right? And that pericardium is that protection around your heart, right? And this is what my massage therapy teacher and professor told me several years ago. She goes, because it was this exact example. She goes, and I flipped that person off. That's me protecting my heart.
Yeah.
And I died laughing.
I'll roll with that.
It's like that Zen koan we like to recite of how much ego do you need? Just enough so you don't get hit by a bus, right? Or, yeah. But to answer your question, DMT then is what? Like, for treatment-resistant God amnesia when needed, optionally.
So speaking of God, I'm reminded of a quote I saw on Instagram posted by Brene Brown. She interviewed Father Richard Rohr.
I like that. I saw it on your
I
story.
reposted it on my story. He says, the people who know God well, mystics, hermits, prayerful people, those who risk everything to find God, always meet a lover, not a dictator.
Yeah,
and so
they see God.
Yeah, Demetri, when you were talking about, like, the true nature of God.
Or goddess.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? That thing, that entity, the energy.
Nous.
Yeah, it's a lover, not a dictator.
You see the divine in everyone. You recognize it, you remember.
Yeah.
And when you do that, like, where I was going with my example is, like, at least when I have felt that way about other people, I don't want to destroy them. I might still want to protect my heart thing with the bird, like you're saying. I don't want to destroy them, though.
Right.
Like, I'm even loving them from a healthy distance.
You flip them off with love.
Yeah.
Which is why if you have amnesia, right? Like, because if you did have all that, power, I mean, you'd be the kid with the magnifying glass, man. We all would be, right? So we've got to temper that. And that's what I would venture to say many of these traditions with yoga, with meditation and breath work are surrounding, like, there's a Taoist master that is long forgotten in many people's worlds and paradigms, by the name of John Chang. He's out of I want to say Singapore and the Philippines. He like throughout the 80s and stuff. But this man had a very deep connection into his meditation practice, of understanding the the process of connecting your root to, like, your sacral, and understanding that there's a positive and a negative that happens in that space through what is considered the root lock in many of meditation practices. This is like the perineal muscle.
Mula Bandha in yoga.
Yep. And this process of locking and root locking yourself into the earth is also grounding yourself into the earth. And then there's also, like, the connection into the heavens through traditional Chinese medicine, understanding the meridians that run through your body, and the ability to press the tongue to the roof of the mouth, then completes the circuit. Right. And so then there becomes a lot of breath work that's involved with charging and understanding the movements that take place with your coccyx and your sacrum, and the pumping action that goes throughout your spine with cerebral spinal fluid, and understanding that there's like a piezoelectric effect that takes place in that. And as that begins to, encompass throughout your whole body, you experience this orbital mechanism that you are charging your body through a natural state of breathing. And I mean, like 0 point energy, I mean, we can go into all of it, but
it's an example of how you can feel that there are ways that bring energy about inside. There are practices like breath work, cold plunge, things we were talking about, or any of these practices, but you can't fully explain it with science. You can start to try, but these traditions like the chakras that we're talking about, with the bandhas that might be like locks or gates regulating energy flow, they're maybe the best language or certain traditions have of explaining it. There's so many different ways of describing it, and then science is here just trying to catch up and playing a very important role.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for everybody. I mean, like, and I would never ever discredit science. Like, I love the two peas to the pod, right? I mean, two sides of the same coin.
Checks and balances.
Yeah. I mean, and kind of just circling back around for a moment into this, this conversation of Hermeticism, right? Like understanding the Hermetic lineage and some of these occult teachings that are held within it. Like, we understand that there is and are what we call magnetic and electric fluids in the universe, right? And this isn't to say like the water that is fluid, right? But if you would consider just matter and the fluidity that is held within these tubes, if you will, the body even of water, right? A body of water being what it is, especially when it's cold, is considered to be a magnetic fluid. It draws in energies into that magnetic, that cold, right? That potential yin. Fire, on the opposite, is that expansive electric fluid. And I mean, you could even liken the fire to being like a plasma type substance, right? And having that fifth, almost borderline element in there also. But recognizing that there are methods with the consciousness that are taught within many of these traditions, the Vedic traditions, yoga, breath work, pranayama breath work, like the Hermetic lineage in particular that I'm most familiar with, but understanding that, there are processes and practices that have been put into place to assist one with achieving these non-dual states without psychedelics just through the breath. Right, that elicit very similar responses throughout a person's psyche, and understanding the golden rule. How would Christ react, right? Like loving thy neighbor, right? Like because you are them, and recognizing like that conscious spirit of reciprocity and compassion. So,
yeah, it's like it's the world peace solution.
Yeah, it is.
I keep thinking about
who would have thought that it all comes down to just like the breath, slowing down and remembering like the divinity within, so we can show up with compassion towards each other, because we're all made of the same stuff. We're all one.
I mean, and like if you go back into history, right, and you look at like the mysteries of Eleusis, right? Like, are you familiar with the mysteries of Eleusis?
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So like, great book out there written by Brian Muraresku. It's called The Immortality Key for any of your listeners, if you want to go into that. It's really amazing book. Goes into the story of Christ and Christianity, and how like, essentially Christ was this, ceremonial master that worked with many different types of plants, many different types of substances. There are depictions on vases in the Vatican of him with Dionysus and Demeter, these, Grecan goddesses that were of agriculture and what's the other one? So
I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the other one, but very specifically where some of these vases, when you scrape the bottoms of them out and you do like spectron, microscopic testing and radio transmissions or whatever it is, like radioactivity, you can see that there were opioids, there were like remnants of cannabis, there were remnants of like scopolamines. Many different types of psychoactive substances that would be in the bottoms of these vases. And so like throughout his studies, Brian's studies, he, came to determine that there were many different plants and medicines that were used in the terminology of the Kukion or ancient Soma that were very reminiscent of these spiritual practices that guide us into our divinity, that guide us back into this remembering. And like specifically the mysteries of Eleusis, I mean, this is where like Marcus Aurelius, you know, found and initially had his experiences where he wrote meditations, right? Some of these like ancient poems.
And fast forward until like the modern day when the PCR machine that replicates DNA came from an LSD experience.
Yep. Someone
Someone driving along the coastal highway in California.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the connections in consciousness, I mean, they would say that, from what I've read, like the raw material and some of these other teachings and writings and things, but that was delivered from like a multidimensional consciousness into that person's being, from having that openness.
All you got to do is fold space and time on itself, and you can reach in there and grab the brilliant ideas from, well, wherever, past
Wherever
and future
they are.
don't matter anymore.
Nikola Tesla said it.
Yeah.
He said it.
So, Demetri, what do you do on a day-to-day basis to treat your God amnesia?
God amnesia. That's funny. I meditate, right? Like meditation is probably one of the most important acts that anybody could ever do.
What is your meditation practice like?
I mean, it changes momentarily. It is always present. There's not really a moment where I'm not meditating. It's become ceremony. It's become life. The very physical act of sitting down and like going into lotus position is something that I do frequently. It's not something that happens like every single day or in a set schedule, although I would probably benefit a tremendous amount if I did do that. But my daily meditation, you know, typically occurs in the very early morning hours when I wake up. Oftentimes when I'm still laying in bed, and I consciously am recollecting who I am. Like I can feel the energies enter into my consciousness before I'm even like fully awake.
You're not saying to yourself, "I am God." Hey, remember, you're God.
No,
It's not
no,
smack,
it's
smack.
like it's like it's a feeling, it's a resonance of self that I would say. I mean, it can change, but typically when I go and I seek inward for that, it's there and it's present, and it's a very strong presence of self.
It's like tuning an instrument.
Absolutely.
I played the cello in high school, and I would tune the cello by playing one string with another, and then when they harmonize correctly, I know it's in tune. They're synchronizing appropriately.
I actually love that you brought that up. The concept of understanding the body as an instrument, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Your vehicle for enlightenment.
Yeah, and like the cleaner that you eat, the more harmonious that you act in alignment with yourself and your true self, the less dissonant you become, the more attuned and aligned you become, and the more able to receive the wavelength or the frequency that is you into your being undistorted, right?
That's something I can relate to. Like I can relate to the way it feels when I am in tune, and the way it feels when I'm with somebody who has whose instrument may be different or is tuned at a different frequency, but we are harmonizing, right? And it feels very comfortable and right, and we're in flow. And conversely, I know what it feels like to be cacophonous. I know what it feels like to be out of tune and out of sync. And I might not be able to like write an essay about it, but I know it when I see it or feel it.
There's this quote that always stuck with me about, that this is our work, first to find that harmony in oneself, that resonance, and then you interbe with your partner, your loved ones, and then you project that out infinitely into the world. And that's the psychedelic journey right there.
Yeah. Like passively radiating in love.
And what helps you do that in part is meditation. So tuning the instrument so that you can radiate love.
Yeah, I mean, and that process, extends into the practices that I've found with Hermeticism. I would say that is the definition of my practice, is understanding the Hermetic tradition. There's a book out there by Franz Bardon. I believe it's called The Initiation into Ancient Hermeticism, or the Hermetics, something like that. But there's a lot of really wonderful practices and teachings that, when I found that book, aligned very deeply with my own internal practice that I had already had. Like growing up, I used to, go into the shower and wash the negative energy off my body, right? Like clear and cleanse my space. And after I'd get out of the shower, I'd feel a lot better, right? Like if I had just gone in an argument with somebody or was dissonant with myself or whatever that looked like. And so lots of different practices. I mean, I meditate with the elements. There are different purposes of meditation with each element, earth, air, fire, water. In order to assist the self with empowering those elements within myself, to assist me with growing, fortitude, mental fortitude, or, spiritual fortitude, and understanding the direction that I'm going in life. And there's a song out there that's always been really touching to me. It goes something like, when my trust is without borders, I trust that spirit will guide me, or something like that, right? And understanding that, when we really surrender to the experience that is life, that there is a guidance that happens, and you start to listen, and you start to honor that calling that is every single day. And a lot of people find that as being, their vocation or the work that they do on a daily basis, and that, gives them all the dopamine that they need in the world to continue to go and to, be consistent in their world and their reality. But
their dharma, perhaps.
Yeah. Mine is very much similar to creating that balance. And, when I connect into the collective, or how to say this, attune myself to that resonant frequency of the world, oftentimes there's a lot of pain and grief and sadness that I feel that enters into my body, and I need to ground that out and transmute that somehow. And that looks like breath work. That looks like just honoring the emotion as it enters into my space, and recognizing that this is part of the work. They may not be my feelings. They may be somebody else's feelings that I'm feeling around me through transference or whatever, or what I would consider is really letting go of that finite physicality that we recognize as being this illusory self, right? This individualized self, and recognizing that there's only one of us here, but we're experiencing ourselves each individually, subjectively, and sometimes people need help.
That's when we can really help, is when we dissolve the boundaries.
Yeah.
The illusion of separation between us, and we can take on someone's suffering, ancestral or otherwise, and help transmute it or get in there with them.
Yeah, I mean, understanding that trauma and generational trauma is it's given to us by our parents, and it's transitioned or transferred, right? Through the epigenome, and the way that I would say the methylation process takes place in our DNA, and how it signals activation of an allele and all the things. But there's so much that can be recognized in that space of understanding that genealogical structure, and also that interconnectedness that we all share. And it becomes that becomes the work, right? That becomes this process of remembrance. That is what I would venture to say is the work that Christ was doing. And it's helping each other to remember who you are, right? That golden rule, and then doing unto others as you would do unto yourself. All of these different pieces.
Remember to remember.
Yeah. Remember Simba.
Yeah.
Right? That movie was beautiful.
I think we covered it.
Yeah, we got it. So, Demetri, if you want to just sort of share what you're up to in the world with our listeners, and if you want people to reach out to you, you're welcome to share any socials or...
Sure. So, I mean, currently, the work that I've been involved with has been kind of threefold, personal projects, societal projects, and then nonprofits, I guess I would say, and the nonprofit work that I do is focused around decriminalizing plant medicines, entheogens. I'm the executive director of Decriminalize Nature Utah. We are a satellite or part of like a chapter of the national body Decriminalize Nature organization that has passed legislation language in I think 13 states now. And we're presenting, it's really wonderful. We're presenting also, I think, statewide legislation in I think like 4 or 5 states or something like that this year. And so essentially, that is the nonprofit look that we are doing. And if you're looking to get involved with that, by all means, your listeners are more than welcome to reach out to me and my organization at info@decriminalize nature, or it's actually info@decriminalizeslc.org. And then I guess some of my own personal projects. I've been working on a retreat center down in Colombia. That's a teacher training facility. We are basically designing this space to work with clinicians, doctors, therapists, average people also that desire to come down and initiate themselves with ayahuasca in the traditional sense.
Field trip, Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. And we work very closely with the Inca people of the Putumayo down in Colombia. And then, just here personally, I'm just doing my best to be a good human, and make change here in Utah locally. And I've been working a lot with our elected officials and kind of just getting everything aligned for this next year so that we can draft some bills that are going to support both the medical and clinical and therapeutic sides of entheogens and psychedelics, as well as that more spiritual, personal, cognitive, liberty-based, community-based ceremony kind of asset within the community to allow people to experience it without, having that red tape of bureaucracy around their waist.
Right.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, amazing. Thank you for the work you're doing, like the brave work and sharing your wisdom and gifts so freely. It's really touching.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I would just say that just so your listeners are aware, if they are interested in any of my services or anything like that, personally, I do coaching and all those things also. That is part of my consulting practice. That is Raw Dimension. Raw Dimension is just like a wellness consulting agency that I've had out there for the last 5 or 6 years, and help people kind of get into this world of understanding plant medicines, of understanding themselves and the meditation space and yoga and all these other things.
Awesome.
And so,
Raw is in the Egyptian god, not as in the
raw
uncooked meat.
It is RAW,
okay.
And I was kind of positioned as being come into the raw dimension where everything is real and authentic.
Oh, cool.
But also definitely has that very Egyptian raw vibe also with it, because
Double entendre.
I love it.
yeah. So
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
absolutely,
thank
thank
you.
both of you guys.
Thank you, dear listener, for listening. It means a lot to me. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Novamind, a mental health company that specializes in psychedelic medicine and research. You can learn more about Novamind's mission to increase access to legal, safe, and evidence-based psychedelic medicine at novamind.ca. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. If you'd like to reach out to us with questions, suggestions, scathing criticisms, etc., please email us at psychfrontiers@novamind.ca. Thanks again. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Please consult a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.